I'm a zookeeper. Something is very wrong with the animals here. I was debating whether to post about this for some time. I've heard that this was a place to talk about strange things. Maybe someone out there is having a similar experience or can offer me answers to what's happening. I've been a zookeeper for 29 years. I won't say my name or the exact location of where I work for reasons that will become clear. It's a profession that I've embraced with open arms. The sense of purpose derived from caring for animals is something I can't even describe. For all those years, we had gone without incident. That was until the night of the break-in. Sometime last month, around 3 a.m., the security system was triggered. I dragged myself out of bed and to the scene the second the call came in, and I'm not afraid to admit that I broke more than a few speeding laws driving there. My first worry had been the animals, if they'd been hurt. From my own past experiences, there were more than a few sick people like that out there. A million scenarios flashed through my mind, each more horrible than the last. I skidded to the halt as flashing red and blue lights winded into my vision, illuminating the entrance sign, and rushed out. I had been met by the sight of a young police officer who looked fresh out of academy, standing and scratching his head. His eyes snapped open when he saw me leaning against the fluttering yellow tape, cordoning off the scene. "Hey," he barked. "You're not supposed to go in there." "I work here. Senior zookeeper," I shot back, flashing on my tags. "What happened?" The cop stood there in silence, trying to formulate an answer. His shoulders sagged in defeat. "To be honest, I don't even know," he admitted. Police found no evidence of any intruder present, but on all the walls of every exhibit, they found spiraling symbols scrawled onto the walls in still dripping red paint. The animals were all still asleep inside, oblivious to whoever had entered, even the more hostile ones like the lions and gorillas. In under an hour, whoever had broken in had managed to tag the wall of every exhibit before slipping back into the night. They checked the cameras, but all they saw was lines of vibrating static. They brushed it off as a teenage prank, despite the glaring evidence otherwise. The next morning was spent scrubbing it off in our routine cleanup, but the outline of the scarlet traces lingered for days afterwards against the stony gray. It all began with the bird enclosure. The preening parrots would stand motionless on their perches. They didn't seem to even breathe, just standing over there with their beady eyes following our every movement. Then they would sway back and forth in a mass undulating movement that seemed almost rehearsed, never breaking eye contact. The effect extended to the rest of the birds we had, from the black-headed weaver to the American condor. Whenever someone entered, they would just stop whatever they were doing and whip their beaked heads around in order to stare unrelentingly before starting their bizarre shaking. Some of us joked about it, making the inevitable "the birds" comparisons, and that it was the beginning of an avian uprising. At the same time, we were still concerned. We wondered if it was the stress of the recent break-in, or something in their dietary habits or habitat that was causing the unusual phenomenon. After numerous checks, we found nothing out of the ordinary. But it didn't end with the birds. Whenever we passed by, the animals would fall silent. The lions would prowl the ground, their tails flicking. The bonobos would peer behind from the coverage of the trees. Even when we would wash them each morning, they would stand there rigid and trickling water, not even flinching. The familiarity and trust that we'd long built up with them over the years was long gone from their eyes, replaced by something that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if something else was wearing their skin. It was on one particularly busy day, in the final stages of the summer rush, where families crowded the zoo before the children went back to school. I was in my office filing paperwork, but the resulting screams were loud enough to penetrate through my office window and alert me that something was wrong long before the message had crackled through my radio. One of the gorillas, Henrik, a young male silverback, had started to display extreme distress. He clawed at his face hard enough to leave gouges in his skin and battered his fists against his chest. He howled as if he was seeing something terrible. Then, in front of multiple children, he had repeatedly smashed his head into the glass, hard enough to send jagged cracks racing through the pane. He had done it until his forehead had almost completely split open. Blood smeared across the cracked surface and trickled down onto the ground. We managed to sedate him before he broke through, but by then the real damage had already been done. The sight of him lying on the cold metal slab in our zoo veterinarian's office, eyes closed with a trailing line of stitches ending just above the bridge of his nose, broke my heart. I'd been present when he'd been born, and had watched him grow into an adult in the past few years. He was almost a son to me. Despite our best attempts, nobody could explain his sudden outburst. The gorilla enclosure was sealed off for repairs the next few days as Henrik recovered. The usual morning meeting the next day was devoid of the usual playful ribbing and jovial mood, replaced by cold realization and uncertainty. I tried to keep order as best as I could, but even I was unnerved by the new atmosphere that had settled. We were all becoming afraid of the place that we had once loved. The strange behavior continued. The birds continued to sway, as if pulled back and forth by some invisible hand, their feathers falling to the ground where they'd violently pecked, pieces of skin still attached. The snakes curled themselves into tight, bound balls, burying their heads within their tails. The primates would just sit up on tree stumps, their limbs wrapped around their bodies in an almost fetal position, and scream to the skies. Between the screams, they made quieter noises that almost sounded like whispers or giggling. Sometimes I swore that I could see the muscles under their skin shift and stretch. At the time, I dismissed it as a trick of the light. Their lips would recede into horrific fanged grins so wide that their faces seemed to be straining not to split apart from the exertion. I had come down to the marsupial exhibit one day, one of the most popular, only to find that a chinchilla had devoured her newborn kits, her gray-white fur still flecked with gore. She glared up at me, dark eyes devoid of light. I recalled reading an article once where animals displayed unusual behaviors right before a natural disaster, usually an earthquake. It was thought that some vertebrate varieties could sense natural disturbances long before they happened. It made some sense, being in a state known for its significant seismic activity, but this transcended beyond what was natural. It had been late one night in the office, as I'd been poring over documents. The adjacent window allows me a near bird's-eye view of the entire zoo. In front of the full-peaking moon through my half-closed blinds, the elongated silhouette of a giraffe stumbled into my view. It stood there, the glowing orbs of its eyes hovering about in the darkness. I had worked there almost 30 years, but never had I been so terrified of such a docile animal as I had been in that moment. Its head reared back, and I could only watch as its skull started to split in half, the skin peeling backwards from its face. Its neck soon followed afterwards, unfurling like the petals of a flower, the exposed red esophagus pulsating up in the moonlight. From out of the exposed neck stem, slick black tentacles flared up into the chilly night air. It continued for a few horrific, mesmerizing minutes while I could only watch, my brain still working to understand what was taking place in front of me. As quickly as it had happened, the creature snapped back to its former form, like nothing had happened, and continued to graze at the ground before padding back into the darkness. I have no idea what the hell is going on, but I'm sure that the break-in had something to do with it. Something happened on that night that was outside human explanation. Their cries grow louder each day, all blending into one horrific noise that fills the air. They're becoming something else, and I don't know for how much longer we can keep them locked up.